So, who am I? My name is Tamas, and I work as a senior technical instructor for MarkLogic. I'm part of the MarkLogic University team. I've been a technical trainer forever. Before that, I used to be a full-stack web developer, and I basically work with the JavaScript programming language a lot. And today we're going to talk to you about the JavaScript programming language and try to convince you why you should use JavaScript in a full-stack application environment. And my partner in crime is...
Excuse me, it's a good start, isn't it? Christy Harrigan. I've been at MarkLogic for 18 months. I have also developed in JavaScript professionally before. I'm in pre-sales at the moment, but I was a software engineer before that. I do contribute quite a lot to open source technologies. So if you want to see what some of my work is and critique it, you can go to my GitHub page. So, okay, that's a little bit about us. So we're going to look at what JavaScript is, what some of the benefits are, and especially around building web applications and why it is a great language. Certainly is rough around the edges in places, but there's some real benefits to adopting it as a full-stack programming language. We're going to look at what some of these sort of typical application architectures look like, and then we're going to hand back to my lovely friend Tamas to go through a demo. So when we think about building a web application, and by web application I mean typically something that is delivered to the end user via the browser. And obviously browsers are leveraging web technologies, HTML, and JavaScript is clearly in the browser. So it's everywhere. Every device has a web browser pretty much, so that runs JavaScript. But of course, the front end is only a small piece of the puzzle. And you need to think about what some of the back end pieces are. Where's the business logic being executed? Where is the data being persisted? This is day 3 of MarkLogic World, so I'm fairly sure by now you've been told why MarkLogic is such a great choice for the persistence layer. And what we're really interested in, though, is when we look at the end-to-end of an architecture, we're really interested in being able to develop this application effectively and efficiently, right? I'm sure most of us are software developers or work with software developers. And getting our products out quickly is important. And as well, we're seeing a prevalence in agile, iterative development. So we want to be able to not just go away for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, and build something and then go, ta-da! We want to be able to iterate on that, get user feedback quickly. And so when we actually approach the end-to-end architecture with this in mind, we start to realize certain design decisions can impact our ability to develop efficiently, effectively, and be able to do these tight iteration loops to get the user feedback effectively. So these are a few things to consider when looking at the wide array of technologies that we could use to build our web applications. We're going to look at a few possibilities in a few slides' time, which leverage different languages. But this is a talk about JavaScript. So obviously, the tagline, the plot twist is going to be, hey, JavaScript is a great language to adopt, and technologies that leverage JavaScript are great technologies to adopt. But why JavaScript in the first place? We know it's in the browser, so we know it's everywhere. But actually, when we look at development resources, when we look at availability of skilled developers, when we look at, if you are a developer, what skills are most valuable to you in the marketplace, we're seeing JavaScript is starting to take over the world. Looking at GitHub alone, GitHub is possibly the most prolific open source contribution sort of platform, if you like. JavaScript has taken over as the most popular language on there. And if you need more convincing, well, job trends are showing that if you know things like Node.js, if you know things like Angular, then you're able to command a better salary. There's more resources out there, so if you're looking to build out a competent team, You're more likely to find skilled JavaScript developers in other languages. And correspondingly, we're seeing what was previously the dominant language probably for the last 10, 15 years, which was Java. We're seeing there's a massive drop, as well as corresponding SQL trends versus NoSQL. So, as I said, JavaScript is in the browser. A little bit of history. It was developed by Brendan Eich, I think, from Mozilla back in the day, as a way of making text move across the screen. I'm sure we all remember those clunky web pages from the 90s, which looked horrendous. And they were completely static. HTML is a markup language. It's a document format. So it was developed as a way of being able to make it a little bit more dynamic. The hint's in the name. It was a scripting language. It wasn't designed initially to be a programming language. It was just designed to add a little bit of funkiness to your web pages. However, it has gone through several iterations. The current standard of ECMA script 2015, so it's become a ratified standard. It's now go through standardized bodies. You know, if any of you remember the browser wars of the 90s and early 2000s, where every single browser had its own version of JavaScript and completely incompatible, we're seeing that that has gone away and that now you can more or less write one JavaScript and it will run more or less everywhere. It's also gone through a lot of transformations in terms of the language idioms. So JavaScript often gets, rightly so, I think, a bad rep for being able to write some really nasty, funky code. You can still do that, but if you are a software engineer and you do want to apply some best practices and some good software engineering techniques, there's some nice idioms built into the language now that enable you to do that. We'll see what some of those are and some of those that are particularly supported by MarkLogic in a little bit. But really what's seen, I think, the big surgence in popularity is the development of certain frameworks, things like a jQuery, which was a sort of almost like a precursor to Angular. It was designed as a way of overcoming some of the cross-browser incompatibility issues and being able to write web pages or do certain common tasks much easier. Then we saw Angular, which was developed by Google. Of course, Google are, you know, the heavyweights in the web world. And things like Backbone. But also, we've started to see with companies like Joyent develop Node.js. And this was really a departure from JavaScript in the browser alone to JavaScript in the middle tier, actually running some of that more server-oriented logic in JavaScript. And the reason they took it, the reason why they said, well, we've already got Java, we've got C#, we've got Python, Ruby, we've got C++, if you still code in that, why would we take a new language? The reason being is that it is very lightweight and expressive. You can write some really neat code in it. But very importantly, the way its execution model is it allows you to write some very fast asynchronous code. When you look at web servers, they're typically, the pattern tends to follow a lot of very short, sharp-lived executions. Right, give me this file, you know, transform this bit of markup here, go make off a call to a database or a service. And it's, you know, we can have hundreds or thousands or millions even of concurrent short-lived execution queries. The way JavaScript is kind of built makes being able to build these highly scalable, short-lived applications very, very much easier than, say, trying to build it with threads or some other heavyweight Notion and Java. And it was built on V8, which was also Google's contribution. This is their execution language in Chrome. And Node.js is built on that. And it uses JIT compilation to take your JavaScript into highly efficient code. So it runs pretty fast these days, actually. So that's what JavaScript is a little bit, and why you should be excited in it. It is a cool language. What about the web architectures? So a typical web architecture has, at the very least, 2 tiers. It has the client tier. Typically, we're talking about a browser. And it has the middle tier, the server, the thing that dishes up the files and runs some kind of business logic. What's nice about this is that we have a separation of concerns. If some of you remember the 90s and things like, where the middle tier also was responsible for a lot of the rendering, where all we had was HTML, then we typically had one tier and it just pushed out a document to be rendered on the client. But with the advent of JavaScript, we can move a lot of the logic, the rendering logic, the display logic onto the client. Let the client worry about that, take those processing cycles off from the server and let the server do the business logic. We get a nice separation of concerns, and of course, as engineers, we like separation of concerns. Of course, we're missing an important piece in this architecture, which is where we're going to persist this data. Middle tiers are typically memory bound, so they tend to store objects in memory. If you want to persist the user data, product information, purchase history, all that good stuff, guess what? You need a database. So let's introduce a database to the picture. So again, we've got a nice separation of concerns. The database is responsible for the persistence of data. And again, what we do see is we see often the movement of some of the logic responsible for the querying and persistence of that data move to the database layer. And again, the reason is very simple. Take that logic off the middle tier, move it close to the data because bandwidth is expensive, right? So if we can do a lot of that processing without having to move that data off, then that's a really good thing. So if we took a look at a traditional architectural stack, technology stack for this three-tier approach, you might choose struts, okay? It's a bit antiquated now, but it's just an example, right? JSP, even Angular, doesn't really matter. Spring is very popular in the middle tier. It's a Java-based middle tier, and Oracle, a SQL-based or SQL Server for the backend. Okay, well, there's obviously good reasons to choose these. These are mature technologies. They're proven. That's great. But if we come back to what we were saying right at the beginning of the talk, when we're saying what we really want to be able to do is develop quicker with tighter iteration cycles, we find that actually when you get under the covers, you see you have different data models at each of the tiers. You have different programming languages at each of the tiers. This creates a significant cognitive overhead. Between each of the tiers, you can't just move data from one tier to the next. You have to transform that data into data models that really aren't that compatible. Relational data models don't look like object models. Not only that, but you also have different programming languages, you have different editors, you have different builds, you have different tests, you have to hire in different resources. And when you want to make a change in one place, you have to perhaps translate that to 2 or 3 different other, different languages and so on. It becomes much harder to iterate. It becomes much more brittle. So can we improve on that? Wouldn't it be nice if we could get rid of this cognitive overhead? And you can. We spoke earlier about Node.js. Well, if instead of putting Spring in the middle, what if you put Node in the middle? Now, a common objection you hear about Node is, yeah, but it's not really enterprise ready. We'll get onto that into a second. But just to say, plenty of people are using Node in the enterprise. It is running in production, especially things like Node 6 and so on, where they have long-term support. Maybe it might be a bit harder to sell than something like Spring. But, what we are gaining is the ability to have JSON objects in both the browser and in the middle tier and one language. What this means is imagine validation code. Let's take validation code as an example. I might have my form, and I might want to type in an email address. So I can do validation in the browser, right? I type in Christy instead of putting an ampersand. I put an exclamation mark because I don't want you to know my email address. And it goes, sorry, you need to put an email address in. But that's not to stop me from going into the HTML and the JavaScript and figuring out what the callback to the server is, right? So I mock up my own REST call back to the server with my fake email address. So I need to do validation on the server side. But it's probably the same code, right? It's probably the same logic. Why wouldn't I want to reuse the logic? Well, if I'm using the same language, I can. And because I'm using the same data model, the data transport and the data model on both ends are exactly the same. We've reduced a massive amount of cognitive overhead, development overhead, and we're able to iterate that much quicker. But what about the database? Oh, so I missed a slide there. Do beg your pardon. Okay, yeah, what about the database? Whereas things like SQL Server, Oracle, Cassandra, and so on all use different data models. They use SQL. Well, Cassandra doesn't, but Oracle uses SQL. We've still got this problem of different models, different language. What was really cool about MarkLogic 8 is that it introduced JavaScript into the database. Remember we spoke about wanting to move some of that logic about persistence and query into the database because that's where it sits, that's where it, to reduce bandwidth. Rather than writing in XQuery or rather than writing in SQL, stored procedures, you can now write it in JavaScript. And because MarkLogic natively persists JSON, you can use the same data model as well. All of a sudden, I can now take some of that persistent, that logic, say validation logic, I can run it in the same place in 3 different areas. I've got the same data model, I don't have to transform it. I can say, go get me my customer record over here from the browser, goes to the middle tier and it says, I don't have that in cache, go get that from the database. And the database says, oh, here it is. Pass it back, pass it back. No effort, no development effort. That's pretty cool. So we're starting to move much closer to our ability to iterate very quickly. And of course, I'm not going to bore you because you've probably already heard about how great MarkLogic is. We have transactions, we have ACID security, we have high availability. So when we came back to this, but isn't Node really enterprise ready? Do you know what? It actually doesn't matter that much because MarkLogic is. And if you adopt something like I hate to use this term, but microservices approach in the middle tier, where the middle tier is just a business logic layer, if it does happen to go under, just restart it. You've persisted the data in the database. You know it sits there. You know it's consistent. You know the database isn't going to go under because it's highly available. We know we've got disaster recovery, so we can get that data back. So what? Use an enterprise database to do the really hard part, the persistence of the data, and use Node.js and JavaScript in the browser to reduce the cognitive and development overhead. So, excuse me. So just to sort of really drive home what I've just said, if we compare and contrast the previous slide of the different struts and Oracle and Spring, with different data models, different languages, we have one data model, one programming language. So what does JavaScript in the middle tier look like? I'm going to change tacks a little bit here, away from architectural decisions to a bit of a feel of what JavaScript looks like. So as I said earlier, one of the nice things about JavaScript is it's very lightweight, and Node have adopted this asynchronous method of execution. So what this means is that JavaScript runs in a single thread. So it doesn't have a notion of threading. Web workers are kind of, we'll ignore that for the moment. For the moment, Node runs in a single thread. So what this means is that you don't have context switching. So from a very low-level perspective, it's ultra efficient for I/O. You aren't having to move in different contexts and different threads all the time. What instead it encourages is short-lived tasks. Remember I said about web servers, that's the profile of a web server, or middle tier, lots of short-lived tasks. So what happens is when you have a long-lived task, like making a call off to the database, what it does is it says, OK, go make the call off to the database, and then tell me when you've got the result back. I'm going to relinquish control and let some other task execute in the meantime. So we see that here. Okay, first of all, we're importing MarkLogic. So JavaScript has a nice idea of import statements, a bit like Python. We're going to create a client. Okay, great. We're going to build up some query, go get me all the documents in the books collection. And then what I want you to do is go do that. That's going to take a second or whatever. Doesn't matter, a long time in terms of response times. And when you've gone and got that result, go do what's in this last line here. It's just going to print it out to the console. It doesn't do anything interesting. But what it means is that, unlike threads, where I don't have any control over where I relinquish, I relinquish execution to another thread, here I am very explicit. So when we talk about a lot of the problems that we face with concurrency and concurrent code around shared objects and so on and reentrancy, you simplify the model massively by adopting this approach. It's got a rich ecosystem of packages. I mean, if you go to NPM, there's, I don't know how many millions of packages. So it really is a very mature middle tier. And on the database, again, we've got JavaScript. But interestingly, MarkLogic has adopted a slightly different execution model to Node. Instead of having this idea of callbacks or promises, sort of asynchronous code, MarkLogic's fundamental execution model doesn't follow that. Instead, it focuses on what we might call lazy evaluation. So what happens here is each block of code, each module, it's not going to run concurrently. MarkLogic is naturally a parallel engine, but within each block of code, we aren't worrying about lots of different requests coming in. Instead, what happens is we've got this for line here, for loops. For those of you who know a little bit about coding, for loops. So for everything in my result query, do what's in those 2 lines there. So basically take those results and push it into some array. Every time we iterate over a result, because that result, the result set might be 100 large, 1,000 large, and the way MarkLogic works is it goes and grabs them one at a time, and so it's lazy evaluation. As the result set comes back, it reevaluates what's inside, inside that for loop. I'm not going to confuse you too much. If you got that, great. If not, it doesn't matter. The point is that you've still got a nice idiomatic design. It's slightly different paradigms. One's asynchronous, one's lazy execution. But hopefully what you can see from this is, A, it looks quite similar to xQuery. So if you do know xQuery, the library names look similar. And if you know JavaScript, it's not some funky thing that we've done here. It's just standard JavaScript. What's also nice about this is that rather than having a browser on the front end, you can actually put any kind of application on the front end. So we call this the data hub architecture. So instead of, as I say, having like a browser connect to the middle tier to the database, you could have a message queue or some other application. But because it's just REST points, it's just JSON, it's just JavaScript, it becomes quite a nice modular, pluggable architecture. So, final slide from me before I hand over. At MarkLogic, we love JavaScript. It is a first-class citizen. We expect the performance to be that of xQuery, so you aren't losing anything by adopting JavaScript. And I said earlier that JavaScript has gone through a lot of iterations. It's quite a nice language now. Some of the new features in the latest iteration, ECMA Script 2015, some of the cool things, classes. Before, you had to kind of do some weird things to get class patterns going. There's a nice syntax for that now. Maps and sets, that's huge. If you come from Java or .NET, you want to be able to do efficient lookups and so on, where you're not just talking about string keys or number keys. So it's got full hash maps and sets. I love that. And promises built into the language. This was this asynchronous pattern I spoke about in the Node world. That's just first class. You don't have to bring in some extra library to get that. So these are all the features that are actually supported by MarkLogic. If you want to find out what any of these are, come talk to me afterwards. That's absolutely fine. And just to say, obviously, JavaScript is the fastest growing language and community at the moment, and we intend to keep pace with it. So now I'd like to hand over to have a quick demo.
Thank you. Okay, guys, so you heard about application architectures, and you probably, Christy, told you why JavaScript is a nice thing, and hopefully you're convinced now. So we're going to take a look at an application that has been written using this three-tiered architecture that uses JavaScript at every tier. And of course, this demo starts with you guys and your mobile phone. So you all have a smartphone, you all like to take pictures with that smartphone, and lots of people don't actually know that when you take a picture using your mobile phone, and if you have the location services switched on for your phone, the image will consist some metadata that includes the geospatial location where you took that picture. So what we can do, and this whole idea behind this application is very simple, is that we're going to take a binary file, the image that you took using your smartphone. We're then going to extract some information out of that and store it in a JSON format. So here you see an example image that someone took in San Francisco, and then on the right-hand side you see the JSON document that we created, which contains things like the file name, the name of the actual image, and you can see there's a location property that contains a type with a coordinates array. Okay, so that is the geospatial location where that image was taken. And then also there's a make, and there's a model, and there's a creation time, so some additional metadata about the image. And because probably you've heard this throughout the various other presentations, and in MarkLogic you can store geospatial data, you can store binary documents, and you can store JSON documents as well. So we can take this data and insert that into the database. But of course we can do a lot more, because if you know the latitude and longitude pair for a particular location, you can then run that through what is called a reverse geocoding service, and then you can determine the city and the country of that location. So we can update our JSON document, and we can put a city and country property in it so that we know that this picture was actually taken in San Francisco, United States. And we're not going to stop here, because if you know that the picture was taken in San Francisco, then you can probably gather some information about San Francisco or the United States of America as well. So using yet another service, we go out to a semantic web service, and we gather semantic information, or just for those of you who don't know what semantic is, just information about the United States of America. And then we can store that and persist that inside the MarkLogic database as well. So what you end up having is a binary image, so the JPEG image itself, the photo itself, a JSON document that contains information about the image, and a semantic document containing information about the country itself. And then what we've done, we created an application around this, which uses the three-tiered architecture that Christy just discussed with you. So we have MarkLogic, of course, then we have a Node.js middle tier, and then we have a browser front end using HTML and AngularJS, of course. And as I was saying, we use JSON documents, we display these binary documents, and we also use the RDF triples, which are the semantic documents. And we've added some additional features to the application, such as authentication. So MarkLogic is very big on security, so we want to make sure that users can register, upload their pictures, and then if another user registers, they don't see the pictures and the data that the other user uploaded. So we have some built-in security features as well in the application. Then we also wanted to add some search, because we are also big on search, so why not? We added text search and geospatial search capabilities to the application so that you can run geospatial search and find the pictures that you took in a certain location. And we also have some server-side JavaScript involved in here, which is responsible for actually manipulating the semantic data. So there's lots of JavaScript going on, and let's actually go ahead and have a look at the application itself. So this is the application. User interface-wise, let's ignore how ugly or pretty it looks, please. So we have 3 menu items: home, which is the main page, then we have public photos, which does not display anything at the moment, and then we have a register menu item. So in order to start using the application, we need to go ahead and register ourselves. So I'm going to register a user. And once I register the user, I can then go ahead and log into the application as well. When I log in, I get access to different pieces of functionality. Like I can upload a photo, I can have a look at the profile, I can take a look at a map or execute search. If I have a look at the map, you can see that it's not going to display anything because I haven't loaded any pictures into the system. So let's go ahead and find one image and load that into the database. So when I'm going to hit open here, there are quite a few things that are going to happen. So first of all, we're going to insert this JPEG image into the database. We're then going to extract all the information out from the image and also insert the JSON document into the database. And then we are also going to collect the semantic information and insert that into the database. Okay, and you will see that that happens quite fast. So that's done. I can then go to the map, and now I do have a marker, and that is the location where someone took that image. And there are some other things in here, for example, this faceted navigation that you see on the left, which is again a MarkLogic feature, but it's going to be more exciting when I load some more images into the database. So I can actually click on the marker, if I can find it again. And I can take a look at this image, and I can go ahead and edit that. So don't forget, this is, now it's persisted to my database, so I can then make changes to this image. So I can say this is, I know it's maybe the Christmas market. So I can save that, and that information is now persisted to the database. It's there. So don't forget, we have features like ACID support. And if I scroll down, I get some semantic information as well. So this is the information that we collected when someone uploaded the image about the United States. So we have the flag, we have the position of the US on the map, and some other pieces of information along with some description of the country itself. So let's go ahead and upload some additional images just to make this a bit more exciting. And then if I click on map, now you see that these are all the images that I have in my database. And now the faceted navigation makes more sense, right? So I have a facet on the country, which allows me to find images that were taken in a particular location. Or I have two more facets that are the make and the model of the phone. So I can further filter down into my data set. So for example, what if I want to see all the pictures that we took with an iPhone 5? Then I click there, and now these are the 3 images that were taken using that phone. I can then go ahead and edit these as well. And I'm going to update this. This is, I know, a church, and then pretty red church. And save that. And I'm also going to do something here. So I'm going to click this public checkbox, and I will show you what that does in just a second. So just remember, I made one of my pictures public. I also have search features, so I can execute a very simple text search against my data set. So I just enter church, and I can just look up that, and there's the image that I've just uploaded. So I can find images using text search, or I can use this circle here, and I can say, okay, please show me all the pictures that I took this part of the world. Okay, and that is now going to execute a geospatial search. So we have a central point for the circle. We then have a radius, and it displays all the images that are inside that circle. So let's log out, and then let's also create another user. Call that Dave. And then log in as that user. So this is another user, so by default, this user will not see any of the other images, right? The other user uploaded. So this user is going to go ahead and upload his pictures. And I have prepared some pictures for this guy as well. And again, the same thing happens. If we go to map, then you can see that this is a slightly different data set. I can go ahead and update these images as well. And I have the same functionality again. I have the information about the Dominican Republic, etc. And I can make this picture public as well. So when I log out, if I go to public photos, now I see these 2 public images that the users made public. Okay, so this is again a way of how MarkLogic works with the security and the permissions on the documents. So now this application is really fun because it shows you how this whole 3-tiered architecture is put together, but you don't really see what's going on under the hood. So that's why we're going to very quickly live code an application. So what we have is a very, very simple data set about Star Wars characters. Star Wars fans? Okay. I was expecting more hands, but never mind. So we have some JSON documents that describe, Star Wars characters. So here's one example, name, various other properties as a bio for Darth Vader. So this information is in our database. And what we also have is a very simple application that just prints out hello world. Okay, so I obviously have some code because I don't want to bore you, forever by me typing. So what we have is a very, very, very simple application that at the moment uses two tiers because we don't have the database connection up here yet. What it does, it has a Node.js portion, which then defines, let's make this bigger, sorry, that defines a root, and then that root very simply just calls some Angular code and that prints out a message hello world, and that's what you see now. So what we can do is, as the slides were showing, we then extend our architecture and then we want to have this persistent storage layer. So we have to use a connection to our database. So I'm going to just create a variable here that goes out to localhost, connects to a port. By the way, if I make a mistake, then please shout at me. I never got this right for the first time ever, so live coding on stage is always fun. Okay, so we set up a connection variable. This is just the connection detail that we want to use to connect to the MarkLogic database. We then want to make sure that we actually import the MarkLogic Node.js API. And then once we have that, there is a function that we can use, create database client that accepts that connection. Okay, so with these few lines, we just make a connection to the database. We also have some helper functions that you can use, such as the query builder. So this query builder will allow us to build some queries and construct queries that go out to the database. Now, what we want to do, we also want to add another route to our application, let's say API/characters, and we want to handle the HTTP GET request against that. So what this means, every time when someone goes to the /API/characters endpoint in our application using an HTTP GET request, we want something to happen. What we want to happen is a function called list_characters, and then we have to go ahead and write that function. And what that function will do is very simply, it's going to go out to the MarkLogic database, and it will get all the documents, all the JSON documents. It will query for all the JSON documents and then return that for us. So there's a particular syntax. So we build a query, and then you build using the query builder. You have a bunch of where statements, and then you say collection, and those documents are in a collection called character. So we just, by looking at this and reading it as pure English, go out to the database and give me all the documents where these documents belong to a collection called character. And then once you have a result, then let's handle the response. So the response will contain all the documents from the database, and we just send that back in a JSON format. Okay, so with a few lines of code, we now have in the Node.js bit, in the middle tier, all the JSON documents. So what we need to do, we need to make sure that we somehow display that data in AngularJS. So again, I'm going to add another 10 lines of code or so, and then hopefully we will have some documents appearing. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to edit my code. If you don't know Angular, this may sound, or this may look very weird, but I'm going to talk again, just pure English. So what's going to happen here, we want to make an HTTP GET request out to the endpoint that we have just created, right? Which is API/characters. And just like before, once there's a response, we want to make sure that we get that response and then we push that to the browser. And I set up a variable called characters, which is going to be response.data. So we want to get the data from the Node.js. Okay? All I need to do now is go into this HTML file where I have the, I didn't delete that, so imagine that's not here yet. So that VM message is the message that you see, that's the hello world message that you see, and I just add this now very conveniently. What I will do is that I'm going to iterate through all the characters and just print out the name property for those characters. Okay, so theoretically, if I go back to my browser now, if I haven't done anything wrong, then I get the character names listed in my HTML that comes from the database. Okay, so a few things to remember here is that JSON documents are there in my database, right? Then I wrote some JavaScript code inside Node.js where I queried my database, and I got those JSON documents, pushed them through to Angular, and then from Angular, again, I didn't transform these documents. I just used dot walking, so I used the dot name property to print out the values coming from the database inside my HTML. Okay, and again, obviously I had some boilerplate code, so some code that I had to set up. But again, you just saw that I had about 6 lines of Node.js code and another 4 or 5 lines of Angular code that I had to modify to get this result in my browser. Okay. So we've been through this. So this is not only true for the geophoto, that's the application that you saw before, or the application that I just live coded, but the same data type, so using the same data type and using the same programming language results in a massive reduction of complexity, of time, and also the duration of the project itself. Also, you can share code and you can share the data models between the different tiers of your application, right? So JSON is natively understood by JavaScript, so you don't need to transform that. And of course, using MarkLogic as well, you get some performance and application scalability features that you can just use from Node.js using the Node.js Client API. So as a summary, I think this is just, again, repeating what we've been saying before. Try to embrace the JavaScript language. So lots of people think that JavaScript is not enterprise, but you were saying that as well. It can be enterprise also because you have an enterprise-grade database running at the database tier. So go ahead, experiment with JavaScript. Also, we're going to give you a few resources. So on the next slide, we have a few links where you can download these sample applications. So there's this Star Wars application that looks a bit prettier, so you can have a look at the code. It's very, very simple to follow. We also give you access to a Node.js training as part of the MarkLogic University. That's for free. There are on-demand courses. There's the documentation. So please go ahead and check those out. So that's here. So you get all these links to various GitHub repositories and to our website as well. And I think we have about 5 minutes left, so it's time for Q&A. So if you have any questions to Christy or myself, then please raise your hand and ask away. And there's a microphone coming as well.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm just wondering actually why I even need a Node.js middle tier if I can run JavaScript within MarkLogic server. I mean, they're called application servers, so I can create a RESTful service within MarkLogic and put all my business logic there. What's the downside of doing that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Certainly, you can do a two-tier architecture with MarkLogic acting as that middle tier. I think, honestly, the main reason why you may wish to put a third tier in the middle is to try and take some of the non-query performance or CPU cycles away from MarkLogic. Node's going to be cheaper to run. I shouldn't say that perhaps, but Node is cheaper to run than MarkLogic. So that would be a reason to do that, is just to try and almost keep the costs down a little bit. Yeah.
And the other reason, is that for Node.js you get lots of additional packages that you can use. So there's this npm repository where developers put their their libraries, their frameworks, etc. So you have access to all of those. Hundreds of thousands of packages that you can just install for your application and then use them. Whatever those may be. You're welcome. There was another one there.
It was me, but it was essentially the same question, really. I guess, does MarkLogic let you import Node modules in any way? Does it support the same APIs that Node provides to let you import some modules?
Potentially. It depends if those modules use Node-specific APIs that are specific to the execution environment. So things like file system APIs. Some of you may have heard of projects like Browserify. This is an effort to take some of the Node APIs and run them in the browser. So you could do a similar type of thing with some of the NPM packages. There are, as I say, there are a few subtleties in how the two execution languages run, so it's not necessarily just about APIs. But yeah, you can certainly give it a try. I would say for a significant percentage, you'll be able to run them straight away in MarkLogic. Yeah.
Any other questions?
What are your thoughts on using XML with server-side JavaScript? Should you use it? When should you not?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely no reason why not. XML is supported through the DOM APIs that you get. So it's fairly fluent in JavaScript. Obviously, both in the browser. I mean, HTML is an XML-like format. So being able to process and query and navigate and manipulate XML in JavaScript is pretty well supported. Is it quite as fluent as JSON? Maybe not, because JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So you know the built-in primitives of objects and arrays are what make up JSON. So it's very direct. But there is a pretty nice to use API to use XML. So absolutely, if you guys are using predominantly XML, you'll find that it will be pretty straightforward to use that. And of course, it's a nice interchange format to go across the tiers. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes, and it's also, you know, MarkLogic is very big on XML. So from pretty much day one when people started to put together the JavaScript support in the server and then the Node.js Client API, there are some helper methods that allow you to work with XML documents. So one such example is there's this XPath method, which is a JavaScript method written for the JavaScript language, you know, within the scope of MarkLogic, but then it allows you to literally pass in an XPath expression. So right, even though you are in JavaScript and you have XML documents, it's still very easy to run an XPath statement, for example. And then there's the node builder, the whole node builder API, which you can use from server-side JavaScript to build XML nodes as well. It's not going to be as easy as working with JSON documents, but then we try to do our best to still, you know, allow people to use XML documents. Okay, there's a big sign that says time's up. If you have any other questions, then you can find myself or Christy. We are here for the day. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention.